back is going to be like most years for most of us, filled with both memories and with dreams. You get to the end of a year and you kind of reflect back and you kind of reflect forward. It's kind of time in the middle. You see that may be important not only to think about what God has done for us and in thanksgiving to offer up our prayers to God, but also to anticipate what God might do in the future. So I want to talk first of all about memories. I want you to think back over the last year with me for a minute. And it's going to be different for each of us. I understand that. But I want you to think for a minute about this past year and understand, first of all, that whether we like it or not, there has been at least one good thing happen to each of us this year. At least one. Now sometimes that's tough because when we think back at a year, sometimes it tends to be overwhelming if it has been one of those kinds of years. But I suspect if we were honest with ourselves, we would say that at some time in the last 365 days or so, God has done at least one good thing for us. And sometimes, you see, we get so wrapped up in life that we tend to forget that. We hit Thanksgiving, and Thanksgiving is less about being thankful for what was than it is being thankful for what is. I'll say that again. Thanksgiving often becomes less about being thankful for what was and more about being thankful for what is. Now, Tuesday, my son and grandkids are going to show up for about 4 or 5 days of Thanksgiving. And I guarantee you, when they walk in the door Tuesday night, I'm going to be thankful for what is. And I guarantee you, because my son is a really good cook, on Thursday, I am going to be thankful for what is. Okay? And because my son is not only a good cook in the kitchen, but he is also good at construction kind of stuff, and we may get started on some stuff in the basement, I will be thankful for what is. And sometimes I think, at least in my life, and maybe in yours, when we hit Thanksgiving in this time of the year, it's easy to be thankful for what is and much more difficult to remember what was. The end of the year, which always happens at Thanksgiving for the church, is there for a reason. And the reason is that somehow we are called to be people of memory. Ezekiel talks about the nature of this God who comes to us. And remember what he says? In Ezekiel, he says the same thing that we proclaimed in the call to worship this morning. That God is our shepherd and we are the sheep of his pasture. That one of the things we are thankful for is that over the past year, whether we remember or not, specific times we gather with the knowledge that our God is a God who has called us together. Not just once during the 365 days, but over and over and over again. God has called us not only into relationship with each other, but into relationship with him through the gift of his Son, Jesus Christ. So I guess one of my hopes is that over the next week or so before we begin this new year, that one of the things that we spend time doing is remembering the good things that God has done for us. Now, if you're like me, your memories are not just about good things. That every one of us in this community of faith in the last year has known some tragedy. Whether it's death, whether it's separation, whether it's tragedy lived out that has been most powerful in the lives of others. And I'm thinking of the Joplin tornado and the tsunami in Japan and things like that. Every one of us knows what it means to live in a world where all of our memories are not good. Where some of the memories bring forth great grief, where some of the memories bring forth tears, where some of the memories bring forth almost a feeling that somehow we have been separated from this God who loves us. But let me suggest that even in those memories, God is present. And that it is as healthy for us to remember the bad things as it is the good things. Because it is in the memory of the tough stuff of life that we most clearly encounter the love of God that holds us in the midst of that. To somehow say, I'm going to remember the good, but I'm going to push the bad to the back and never think about it again, is not only to live half a life, but is to celebrate only half the time that God has been with us. Because God has been with us through the entirety of this past year and all of the years that happened before that. But I'll tell you something, folks. If I think back on the last year, I've got some good memories, and I've got some bad memories. And then I have got a whole space of time that I would not include in either one of those. I've got a whole slew of days and weeks in my life in the past year where I wouldn't say it's either good or bad, it's just ordinary. You have any days like that? You get to the end of the day and nothing really good happened and nothing really bad happened. It was just another day on the calendar. But let me suggest that even those days are days worth remembering and celebrating because God was with us. And as we move through this Thanksgiving season, I really believe it's important not only to be thankful for what is, but for what was. But it's not just a period of memories as we come to the end of one church year and begin another. It's also about our dreams, about the future that is going to begin every moment, as each new moment brings one step closer to the future. It is a future of hopes. It is a future of dreams. It is a future of possibilities. And once again, I suspect that for each of us, they are different. Now, we hold some corporate hopes and dreams and possibilities for this community of faith, for the larger community of Pittsburgh, and for the larger community of the country and the world that we live in. But individually, each of us has hopes and dreams and possibilities, some of which we keep locked inside of ourselves and don't share with anybody. And my suspicion is, you see, that if Thanksgiving is only about what is, then it removes us from the possibility of being thankful for the God who has promised to be in the what will become. The God who promised in Ezekiel and promised again in Matthew to gather us together into his kingdom, to redeem us, to choose us out from the world as his special children. And see, if we're not thinking about the future, then again we've missed part of where God is in our lives, and part of where God has promised to be for each of us. Now, that's difficult to do. It's difficult because on one hand, when we remember the past, sometimes the negative tends to seem overwhelming. If you're like me, there have been times in my life in the midst of tragedies when I find myself asking where God was in the midst of all of that, and why God didn't intervene in a way that would have been more pleasing to me, certainly. If we're only concerned with the God of the future, and the future is always uncertain, the future is always unknown until we get there, then it's difficult to live in that place because we're not sure what we're going to find, and we're not sure how God is going to be active in the midst of it. The good news, I believe, the good news is that we can be thankful for a God of the past, a God of memories, a God of the present, and a God of the future, the hopes, dreams, and possibilities, precisely because of what God says about God's self. both in Ezekiel and in Matthew. And you do understand, when Jesus makes that proclamation in Matthew about the sheep and the goats and dividing and all of that, he knew Ezekiel pretty well. I mean, that's where it was coming from. And the promise of God is, I think, threefold in Ezekiel and in Matthew. First of all, God has promised to choose, so that life isn't left to chance. That somehow your life and my life, both past, present, and future, is held in the hands of God. And because we are held in God's hands, life is not a gamble, because God chooses us. Second thing about God that God says about what God's self is, not only will he choose, but he will bless us in the midst of it all. Now, sometimes when life gets tough, that's difficult to believe. That there's a blessing there someplace that God has for us that we may not see, that we may not be aware of. But it's most assuredly there, because God has promised not only to choose us, but to bless us in the midst of the choice. And finally, the good news is that we can celebrate and be thankful for the future that is not yet, because God has promised to redeem us. Because God has very clearly said through his Son in a variety of places, and in Matthew as clearly as any place else, I will welcome you into the kingdom which has been prepared for you from the beginning. See, that's really good news. That means I can gather in this last week of the year in anticipation of a whole other 366 days, because it's leap year next year, knowing that I have a God who loves me so much that he chooses me and blesses me and ultimately redeems me to all eternity. Now, I've never believed that faith is just about what God does. That somehow faith is not only about what God does, but about what we do in response to that activity of God. And one of the things I'm aware of, if you use the image of the shepherd and the sheep, is that my God over the last 60 years has spent a lot of time out looking for the lost sheep, being me. And one of the things that I also know is that one of my tendencies is, once God finds me, I'm taken off for another pasture. That somehow or another, God may be faithful to always seek me, but I'm not always faithful to hang around. And so, my goal for the coming year is to live fully with the memories of the past. Fully with the hopes and opportunities and dreams and possibilities for the future. And fully in the moment of the present, when the shepherd comes to me and says, why don't you come home? Why don't you spend time with me? Now that's three really good things to be thankful for. Memories and dreams and the life lived between the two of them. Amen. This time we would invite